Dear friends, good evening. It's our honor and our pleasure to have in this evening invited Professor Achilleas Chaldæakes, Dean and Professor at the National and Kapodistrian University in Athens. Probably you know the rich activity of Professor Chaldæakes. He's a very known chanter of Byzantine music. He's a very known researcher in this field, and he has more than over 200 studies in this perspective. Professor Chaldæakes also conducts Byzantine choir, the famous masters of Byzantine art. And starting this evening for 3 days and meetings, Professor Chaldæakes will speak to us on various topics of Byzantine chant. Dear Professor, I also extend Professor Nicolae Gheorghiță warm greetings to you. Due to some administrative issues, he couldn't join us this evening, but he sends his best regards to you. Again, thank you very much for being here in this project that is co-financed by the University of Music in Bucharest and the administration of the National Cultural Fund. Without any further delays, Professor, please deliver us the results of your research. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Katalin. It's always my pleasure meeting Romanian people, especially my colleagues, you and Professor Gheorghiță, as well as all the people that join us this evening in this lecture. I would like to take this opportunity and say a few words about the so-called analysis of Byzantine music. Dear friends, you have to know that in our field, the scientific field of the so-called Byzantine music, there is not any specific analysis technique. I mean, an analysis technique well known, established, and worldwide spread and used. Of course, we have several suggestions and general ideas on the issue that could be found in the existing relevant bibliography, starting from the fundamental great theory of music written by the highly acclaimed Chrysanthos of Miletus, as well as in a few analogous studies written by contemporary scholars. I have to notice that I have additionally published various books and articles on this specific issue. There, the phenomenon of the analysis of the Byzantine music is mainly being studied on the one hand through the grammar, but also the essential meaning and the deepest philosophy of the poetic text on which the music is based, and on the other via the entire music structure and development, especially via the repetitions and the transpositions of the individual musical formulae of any given melody. The goal of this lecture is dual. Initially, to gather any possible information coming out from the aforementioned relationship between the poetic text and the music itself, by taking into consideration language's specific rules and by analyzing their reflection to the melody's formulation. Finally, we have to describe the principles of the analysis of the Byzantine music. The latter effort could be considered as a first attempt at writing a contemporary guide of the issue under examination, a guide of how to analyze Byzantine music. As far as the first point is concerned, i.e. the importance of the grammar during the effort of analyzing Byzantine music compositions, it has to be noted that amongst Chrysanthos' writings, one could point out an emphasis on the necessity of the plenty of knowledge about the rules of the language in which anyone is willing to compose. Specifically, Chrysanthos is mostly presenting an example of the doxasticon of St. Andrew's feasts, November the 30th, composed by Petros Peloponnesius, through which he is pointing out the following matches. If we have a comma in the words of the text, we have an imperfect cadence of the mode. If we have a semicolon in the words of the text, we have a perfect cadence of the mode. If we have a full stop in the middle of the text, or a full stop in the middle of the text, either following a large period or a short period of text, we have an imperfect cadence of the mode. And finally, we have the final cadence only when the text ends and there follows a sermon by the priest. Let's follow both the poetic and the music text of the mentioned δοξαστικών ιδιόμελων mentioned by Chrysanthos. Please see firstly each poetic text. You can see this poetic text written both in Greek language and according to a translation to English language. Allow me now to present you a score of the relevant music text taken from an edition published in Bucharest in 1820. Indeed, at the points where one comes across a comma or a semicolon or a full stop, the relevant perfect or imperfect cadences of the mode is found, as follows. You can see in this index two imperfect cadences at the points where there is a comma, two perfect cadences at the points where there is a semicolon, two perfect cadences at the points where there is a full stop, as well as a final cadence at the end of the entire text. Please follow with me the index provided in your scene. We have the text ton kyrica της πίστεως, and at the end of this phrase you have a comma, and we can find on this point in the musical text an imperfect cadence based on modes fifth, the mode according to which this δοξαστικόν is composed is fourth plagal mode. So if we have fourth plagal mode, this imperfect cadence found in this specific composition of Petros the Peloponnesos is formed as follows. Εις πίστεως. There is the same phenomenon in the second point presented in your index, where we have also a comma at the end of the phrase «Ίνα πρεσβεύει αυτό». And the imperfect cadence is the very same to the first one. Πρεσβεύει αυτό. After that, one can point a semicolon at the phrase «Ανδρέαν εφημίσομεν» and «Συν τη χωρία των μαθητών του Χριστού εφημίσομεν». The musical text composed by Petros the Peloponnesos at those points are exactly the same, and it formulates a perfect cadence now based on the mode first, i.e. the note ni. Εφημίσομεν. And not by accident, the text, the word is the very same in both cases, εφημίσομεν and εφημίσομεν. And again, the cadence is exactly the same. Εφημίσομεν. After that, we have a pair of full stop, two full stops, at the points of the text εκ του βυθού αλλιεύει and προσκομίζει το Θεό δώρον ευπρόσδεκτο. Full stop, that means for the composer a perfect cadence that is exactly the same, identical to the previous one. Αλλιεύει. And at the second case, δώρον ευπρόσδεκτον. And finally, we have, of course, a full stop at the end of the text and the ημέρα της κρίσεως. And guess what? The final cadence is the same perfect cadence we have already seen before. And η ημέρα της κρίσεως. This is the end of the poetic text, as well as the end of the musical composition, the music composition composed by Petros the Peloponnesius. So, analyzing this specific composition, only from the point of view formed by each grammar, one has already dealt with the majority of its melody. Because till now we are speaking about grammar rules. We are speaking about a comma, about a semicolon, about a full stop. So we have to judge from the point of view of the poetic text, and we have to realize that the formulation of the grammar, the formulation of the poetic text has a reflection to the way the composer is acting. So the grammar rules are formulate the musical rules. We have a series of cadences similar to each other, formulated because of the rules of the grammar. At the following rough index, you can see on the one hand the entire poetic text of the composition under discussion, and on the other, your right part, the parts of the composition that we have already been, they have already been analyzed. You can see through the red ink parts of the composition we have already analyzed because of the rules of the grammar as mentioned before. You can realize that we have 50% of the entire poetic and musical text already been analyzed according to this very first initial examination effort of analyzing a composition. Turning now to the second point of this presentation, i.e. the mentioned principles of the analysis of the Byzantine music. It should be also noted that thanks to the aforementioned Chrysanthos of Maditos, the contemporary musicological research could already formulate a first short guide as far as the technique of the analysis of the Byzantine music is concerned. In my opinion, within his writings, a detailed overview of the issue under discussion is hidden, especially in the 7 chapters that constitute the third part of his great theory of music, which are mostly dealing with the so-called melopoeia. You can see in this index such a detailed overview made on the basis of the content of the mentioned chapters of Chrysanthos' theoretical book. Please note that the relevant material seen in this specific index, a material originally given by Chrysanthos that the present speaker had to reapproach according to a contemporary editing perspective and, of course, to set into a new and most appropriate order, is now gradually developed in order for one to follow step by step the formulation of the entire composing procedure and fully understand it. The latter achievement guarantees the ability of the scholars to also analyze any musical composition. So please, see and carefully note in this index comments on melopoeia procedure, and especially its several aspects, gradually developing as follows. First of all, the great chapter, melopoeia, how to compose. After that, ways of composing, followed by species of psalmody, genera of melos, how psalmodies were composed, loci of sounds, parts of melopoeia, extension of the melody. So we have to realize that we have the very initial issue, our question, a natural question, how can I learn how to compose? This is the practice of melopoeia. One has to familiarize himself with the ability to compose, to set into music any kind of poetic text, specifically in the Byzantine music, hymnographical text. So, Chrysanthos is noting gradually ways of composing. You can see empirically, artistically, scientifically, that is specific kinds of composers. Somebody could compose empirically, another one artistically, according to the rules of the art. And finally, some people scientifically. Scientifically means other an absolute knowledge of the rules of the music itself. Ways of composing, species of psalmodies. And we have a lot of species of psalmodies, like, for example, ανοιξαντάρια, κεκραγάρια, προκείμενα, πασαπνοάρια, πολυέλεοι, χερουβικά, κοινωνικά, αντίφωνα. Those terms, that sound so familiar to our ears, we can listen to such a description of any species of psalmody lots of times during our service in the analogion or during our studies in the field of Byzantine music or Byzantine hymnography as well. And all of them are species, specific names of any kind of psalmody. Everything we have to sing, everything we have to chant has his own individual name that it formulates according to the initial words of each poetic text. For example, it's something common, and I have no doubts that you know that. We are speaking about ανοιξαντάρια because the first phrase, the first words into the psalmic verses that formulate ανοιξαντάρια is starting with ανοιξαντώσου τη χείρα. Also κεκραγάρια because the psalm is saying Kyrie ekekραx, and so on. This is something that Greek people could very, very well understand, but I know that also Romanian people could understand that as well. Even the names of those species are formulated according to the rules of the Greek language. So we have species of psalmodies, and we have genera of melos. We have specific families of the melodies. The very well-known στιχηρarion, ηρμολόγιον, and papadiki. And we are talking about στιχηραρικών, ηρμολογικών, and papadikon melos. Those are specific families, genera of the melos. And we are going on with the procedure of composing itself, how psalmodies were composed. We have specific points that Chrysanthos is pointing out in his great theory, and it's so useful for any one of you to study this part of the Chrysanthos Theoretikon. It's so useful in order for one to understand the chapter of the Melopia, how we have to start and compose any psalmody. We have first to have an idea, melodic idea, and after that, that idea, it has to be written down, and we have to write it down through the notation, the specific Byzantine notation. And after that, we have to methodically deliver the knowledge to our pupils, to our students. And all the other points that Chrysanthos is pointing out is so useful for this way of how one can start and imagine any melody, and after that, not only write it down and publish in a printed book, but also deliver it, teach it to the people. Very important point at this index is the loci of sounds. Loci of sounds. They are being described also in this case through the Greek language. Υπατοειδείς, μεσοειδείς, νητοειδείς. That means the tonal area. The high one, the low one, and the one that is found at the middle of the high and the low tonal and vocal as well area. Parts of the melody. Parts of the melody, this is a very, very important chapter in Melopia, great chapter. I have to explain again the Greek words. Λήψεις, μίξεις, χρήσεις. Λήψεις means that I have an idea. So I have an idea and I can hear in my mind, in my head, lots of musical ideas. So I have this initial musical idea, and after that I have to mix the musical phrases I can imagine, I can listen into my head. So it's the very first idea, and the way I have to mix the musical phrases, λήψεις, mixes, and after that is the χρήσεις. Χρήσεις means how to use these musical ideas, these musical formulas. But I would like to pay particular attention to the last one chapter, the so-called extension of the melody, because this is a so important chapter, and we have undoubtedly to pay particular attention to the importance of the general structure and development of the music during the effort of analyzing Byzantine music compositions. Chrysanthos is pointing out the ability to extend musical compositions through 5 techniques. Those techniques are namely restatement, repetition, imitation of the meaning, alteration, and restitution. For example, if we go back to the above examined δοξαστικών ιδιόμελων of Petros, we can now obviously realize that the parts already primarily analyzed consist of the very same musical phrase that appears either through the mentioned technique of repetition. And what is repetition? Repetition is to repeat a thesis, a musical phrase, or an entire melodic period on the same notes, based on the same tone. Or the technique of the so-called restatement. And what is restatement? Is to occasionally use the same thesis, the same musical phrase, or an entire melodic period into different pitches, based not on the same tone, but spread into different tones. So, the majority of the composer's musical ideas on which this specific entire melody, the Doxastikon, composed by Petros the Peloponnesus, is based, actually conclude to just one simple melodic development that could be found either in the first, ni, or the fifth, the melodic level of the composition. At the same time, this particular melodic development, that is a typical musical cadence of the given mode, the fourth plagal mode, according to which the composition is composed, has to be recognized and specifically characterized under the analogous musicological technique of the restitution. And what is restitution? Is to compose for all the endings of the text periods one cadence only. Whenever we have the end of a period of the poetic text, we have, according to this technique, according to this rule of composing the melody, we have to use the very same cadence. And that is something you can realize that everyone can point out and listen to any kind of melody, from the simpler one to the very melismatic one. In simpler words, I mean that in this composition, one has to recognize just a simple melodic phrase, the following one, ni pa pa vu ga vu vu pa ni pa ni ni. This is the basic melodic phrase used by Petros Peloponnesus in this Doxastikon. And this musical phrase is repeated 7 times in the entire composition. 7 times, compatibly to the technique of the restitution. 7 times. 2 of them are developed according to the technique of the restatement, based on modes fifth. That means not ni pa pa vu ga vu vu pa ni ni, but δι και ζωνή ζω και δι και δι. It's the very same musical cadence, the very same musical idea, but used here by Petros the Peloponnesus according to the technique of restatement. The same musical phrase, the same melody, based on different notes. Especially here on ni and the respectively. So we have 2 times this composition based on modes fifth, and 5 times the very same musical phrase, the very same melodic phrase, developed according to the technique of the repetition. Repetition means the very same, identical one, based, in this case, on modes first, i.e. on note ni. Ni pa pa vu ga vu vu pa ni ni. So, through just this simple musical phrase, the majority of the composition, we mentioned before that we have seen 50% of the composition composed through this simple melodic phrase. So the majority of the composition has been composed according to just a simple musical phrase. Why? Because this is the technique of the so-called restitution, apόδοsis. And what we have this technique? Because we have specific points at the poetic text where phrases are editing. We have full stops. Where we have full stops, we need a cadence. And that cadence, according to the technique of restitution, has to be identical, the very same one. So we have indeed the very same cadence, restitution, but we have a variety of the way of using the very same melody. And what's that variety? We can use the very same melodic phrase even in the first or in the fifth note of the pentachord used by this specific mode, the fourth plagal mode. That's why you can see this musical phrase sounds on the and sounds on ni. In any other kind of mode, we can see this phenomenon, i.e. just a musical phrase spread into all the composition and based in several tonal points of the composition. So, based on such observations, scholars could familiarize themselves. And I sincerely hope that all of you can familiarize yourselves with the ability to understand and sketch an overview of any composition. In my opinion, that perspective is of crucial importance of the analysis of the Byzantine music. Scholars have to develop a deep fantasy in order to establish those research skills that could drive them to such a panoramic overview of any composition they study. This is so important and so useful for our knowledge. And it's so important as well for the way we perform Byzantine music. You can see just a score, a full page or 2 pages, 3 pages, 4 pages, full of notation, a long composition, and we usually start from the beginning and we end at the end, and we don't know what the composer, what's the meaning of this music and what the composer is trying to deliver to us. There is a hidden message from the composer addressed to all of us. And we have to explore and to develop that deep fantasy in order to find, to recognize this message hidden by the composer into a specific score, that means into a specific melodic development. And if we can understand this hidden message, we can familiarize ourselves with that I mentioned before, an overview of any composition. It's like being able not to approach the composition through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages, but to approach the composition according to a sketch, according to an index, according to a plan that was in the fantasy of the very first composer of the composition. And you can imagine how useful is something like that, not only for the scholars, not only for the effort of studying the music, not only for the musicologist, but it's so useful for the chanters as well, especially for the chanters, because this ability could free our way of performing any composition. And this freedom is of crucial importance for any performer for Byzantine music. We have to feel this freedom in order to perform in another, more artistic way, the Byzantine music. I would like to present you some additional examples. In this index, you can see such an overview of the very well-known δοξαστικών ιδιόμελων composed by Konstantinos Prigos. where one can immediately point out the plan of the composition as far as the alteration of Melopias' ethos is concerned. You know, we have a specific aesthetics of the way of understanding, approaching, and feel the philosophy of the music. That is the so-called ethos of Melopia. And we have the systaltic, diastaltic, and hesychastic ethos of Melopia. You know, I think that you know this melody. You can see here a score of this melody, written in both Byzantine and Byzantine notation and transcribing to the staff notation. And this melody starting with a systaltic way. As mysticas, in a low tonal area, and with this aesthetic of systaltic means that I feel like being able to see into my soul, into myself, and understand the meaning of the words of the poetic text. Τα μυστικά σήμερον του πνεύματος άλπιγγας. Please look and point out the way this δοξαστικόν is starting. Τας μυστικάς. That means in Greek words that the poet is going to share with his audience a secret. Mystikas. So we have to create the appropriate soundscape in order for the performer initially and the audience consequently to create this soundscape in order to understand the meaning of the words and the meaning of the music as well. There is a strong combination between the words of the text, logos, poetic text, and music, the composition, any composition. And after that, gradually, we are going to another kind of ethos, the so-called diastaltic one. Diastaltic means that I'm not speaking quietly. I'm speaking loudly, and I try to create a soundscape of noise and joy. For example, σήμερον του πνεύματος σαλπίγγας. Please note the difference between the first musical phrase, systaltic, and the second one, diastaltic. It's a great difference. The secret and the trompetes, salpingas, that sounds the words of the god. And after that, we have the very interesting phenomenon of a stochastic way of chanting in the part of the melody saying melos en harmonion theologias, where we have also an additional technique mentioned before by Chrysanthos, the technique of imitating the meaning of the poetic text. One can notice that in this point of the Doxastikon, the poet is saying that the fathers of our church were chanting the words of the God with an harmonion melos. And you know that an harmonion is a specific genus of Byzantine music. And in this specific point, we have an effort of the composer in order to imitate the enharmonion, the way the enharmonion melus is going to be signed. So έχουμε melos, and this is the phrase we have to point out. Enharmoni, enharmonion. So you can understand that approaching the melody, any kind of melody, under the help or through the grammar, through the rules of the grammar according to which the poetic text is composed. It's a tactic, it's a wise tactic, and so useful in order to understand everything. The poetic text, the meaning of the poetic text, as well as the meaning of the musical text. So, one can now realize that a composition could be fully analyzed, judging just from the point of view formed by the aspects of the ethos of its melodia. Additionally, dealing with longer forms of the Byzantine melodia, the researcher is useful to focus on the general structure that constitutes the entire plan of any composition of this kind. You can see in this index, for example, such a plan sketched in the following index, the index you can see in your scene, where the present speaker is trying to analyze and musicologically comment a polyeleos composed by Petros Beriketis according to the first mode. The melodic material pointing out in this index is constituted from the stereotypical musical phrases of the specific composition that is repeated for any pair of its verses. You can see the entire plan, an overview of this long composition. It's a composition constituted of 40 verses totally. And one can realize that every pair of psalmic verses, we have the very same refrain, the well-known Alleluia. You can see here this refrain at the end of this text, at the end of this index, and we have 1, 2, 3 versions of the refrain. So if you recall in mind polyeleos compositions, you can realize that at the end of any verse, we have a stereotypical musical development. That means the refrain based on the word Alleluia, that is repeated all the time. Alleluia for the first verses. For the second verse, Alleluia. Also the third, the fourth, and so on. So a great part of the entire composition is the same, is repeated. This is something so simple, but we have to realize that the majority of the melodic material we have to deal with is just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 musical phrases that are repeated all the time. This technique of repetition is located at the cadence of any of its psalmic verse for the polyeleos composition. Specifically, while at the same time the refrain remains identical for the entire composition. obviously, this is a reminder of the mentioned technique of both repetition and restitution. So this long-lasting composition consists of 20 individual melismas, plus just one melodic version of each refrain that one can hear repeat at the end of any one of its 40 in total verses. At this point, I have to emphatically repeat once again that the practice of repetitions is of crucial importance for the procedure of the analysis of any Byzantine composition. In short, please note that everything is repeated, obviously and visibly, or even undercover, covertly and invisibly. The researcher's purpose is exactly to deeply investigate, to systematically find, to thoroughly understand, and finally to methodically comment on the technique of melody's repetition used by the composer. Another typical example of the above observations could be found in an ode composition of Germanos, Bishop of New Patras, based on the 3 first psalms of the Psalter, a composition sung during the Vesper service and known as the Makarios Anir. At the index you can see in your scene, you can see such a panoramic overview of the entire composition. Through this overview, it becomes clear that this long-lasting composition consists of only 3 types of melodic motifs. And you can see at the end of this index, according to a musicological analysis of this specific composition, I repeat, a long-lasting one, the 3 first psalms of the Psalter, we have just 3 types of melodic motifs used in the entire composition. In my opinion, while studying such a pluralistic melodic material is more than important to approach the paths of the composer's musical ideas through indexes like the ones I have already shown to you. Allow me to briefly refer to 2 more examples taken from 2 Polyelos compositions composed during the chronological frame of the 18th and the 19th centuries. For the time being, I shall present just the relevant indexes through which any scholar can easily approach the compositions in order to go on with their detailed analysis. The first index refers to a panoramic overview of a composition of Petros Byzantius. One can firstly see compositions overview and secondly in the type of a musicological apparatus criticus, you can see the melodic material from which it is totally made. The second index, the one you can see now on your scene, is dealing with an odd composition appropriate for the Feast of Theophany. This is the other composition. Here, relevant additional poetic texts can be found added to the typical psalmic verses of such a composition. And you can see in this index shown in your scene that through different colors, I try to point out the specific parts of the entire melody, parts that are repeated all the time during the entire melodic development of this long-lasting composition. Finally, I would like to present an example taken from the genus of the so-called mathematarion, a specific sample of the higher artistic creation of the Byzantine melopea. It is a so-called calophonic verse of the second psalm, composed in the 14th century by the distinguished Ioannis Koukouzelis. Here is an index where an overview of the poetic text of the composition under discussion is presented. You can see that it's so useful for the researcher and the chanters to approach such melodies, even they are simple or more melismatic, through indexes in order to have the ability to formulate an overview of the entire composition. This is another compatible index where one can deal with the tradition of the initial part of the musical text of the same composition as it is formed during a long chronological period starting from the 14th century and concluding to the 19th century. At the last indexes, one can additionally follow specific issues of crucial musicological importance, such as the occasionally used types of the Byzantine notation, as well as the contemporary procedure of the so-called exegesis of the old type of the stenographic notation. You can see, for example, here, the very same melody written down according to the so-called old notation, the synoptic one, and in parallel according to its exegesis, i.e. an analytical translation of the same melody made by Hormuzios Chartophylax. To sum up, I have to confess that I feel so grateful studying for a long life period already such inner aspects of Byzantine music, always looking towards a discovery of the secrets of the Byzantine melopea. The field of Byzantine music analysis is the highest level in Byzantine musicological research, one that can reward a scholar with unspeakable musicological and spiritual artistic fruits. I believe that all of you, because I know that all of you are people with a great love about this type of music, the so-called Byzantine music, I strongly believe that you can formulate you can formulate such a way in order to approach, to search, to study, to understand the development of Byzantine music. And once more, I have to point out emphatically that to this purpose, in this effort of yours, you have to take care about both the text, the poetical text. The poetic text is of crucial importance. And after that, in a second level, for the music itself. First of all is the poetic text, even it is a hymnographical text or a text taken from the Psalter, a psalmic text. And after that is the music itself. Please try to imagine any composer known by you. Αντών Παν, Διονύσιος Φωτεινός, Πέτρος Πελοποννήσιος, Πέτρος Βυζάντιος, anyone. Before they compose any kind of music, they had in front of them just a text, a poetic text. And they know how to read and understand the poetic text. And after that, they were trying to investigate, to imagine, to discover, to formulate, according to the rules mentioned before, a music appropriate for the text. That means a music that was so appropriate in order to deliver the meaning of the poetic text to the audience. And all those melodic and musicological rules about melopea, the way we have to understand, to approach, and to compose melodies mentioned by Chrysanthos, they are formulated according to this way of approaching the issue under discussion. We have, first of all, to take care, to understand, to approach, to study the poetic text, and after that, to approach and perform finally the music composed appropriately for any poetic text. The music, our music, Byzantine music, is all the time, is always based on a specific poetic text. So let's try, all of us, to combine both the text, the poetic text, and the music itself. I hope that the points I had the opportunity this evening to share with you to be useful for all of us, and I'm yours for any queries.
Dear Professor, thank you very much. Thank you very much for this rich presentation. It is truly the fruit of a highly intellectual work, and we are grateful for the fact that there are still researchers that are willing to delve so deep in what means the tradition and the history and the methodological approaches of the sacred chant. Thank you so much for this illuminating presentation. I believe now we all have a taste of what means to compose music. I would dare to suggest our friends, if they have any question, to address you. Feel free to address Professor Chaldæakes whatever question you have regarding tonight's so beautiful presentation. Okay then, so dear Professor, having a lot to think about, we are sending you our deepest gratitude, and we are proposing to our friend to be seeing you on next Wednesday, on September 9th, with another interesting meeting. So thank you very, very much for being amongst us this evening, and see you our next meeting on Wednesday. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye, dear friends. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.